boss.
I did all that.
Geez, Dad, how would anyone forget something like that?
You never know which moments will be the ones they'll remember forever. So take time to be a dad today. Learn more at 1-877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov.
Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
The following program is paid for by Barbara Arnwine.
The topics, views, and opinions expressed on the air and via All Igniting Change with Barbara Arnwine, platforms by host Barbara Arnwine Esquire, guests, and supporters are their own and are independent of any organization, entity. Nothing said on the show or any of its platforms constitutes a client-attorney relationship or serves as legal advice counsel. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to Igniting Change, its platforms, or the show's host. It's time now for Igniting Change, a weekly provocative and empowering program where you, the listener, can ignite change. Now here's your host, Barbara Arnwine.
Get up, stand up.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, all of our East Coast listeners, to Igniting Change, and welcome to our Midwest listeners, and welcome to all our West Coast and Deep South listeners. Oh yes, this is a national show, and we got a national topic, if not a global topic, to talk about today. But before we start, I just want to give another shout out to our fallen sister, hero, Shiro, leader, our champion for racial justice, for reparations, for criminal justice reform. I got to give a shout out for the now ancestor, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Daryl and I will be flying out to Houston tomorrow to join the Vice President and many others in paying a tribute to her on Thursday at the funeral. And we just want the world to know that we miss her, that she was a guiding light, but her legacy lives on. And with that, I bring up my amazing co-host, Daryl Jones. Hey, Daryl.
Hey, Barbara, it must be Tuesday. It must be noon Eastern Standard Time because we're talking about igniting change. But, Barbara, as you've indicated, we're going to be talking about AI, and I'm not talking Allen Iverson for those basketball people, but we're talking about, this system that has really intervened and got involved in the voting process and can cause all kinds of problems throughout our lives. But you can rest assured this, Barbara, that if Sheila Jackson Lee were with us today, she would be standing there in the fight, being certain that people's rights are protected and that their imaging is protected and they're getting accurate information. And she would be leading that fight, I believe, in the AI world. So, in her memory, I say ashe, because we really, really appreciate all that she did, all that she accomplished, and the road that she laid for what is to come to our future, Barbara.
My, and so it is my pleasure to introduce our show today. It's called Artificial Intelligence in the 2024 Elections. What's race got to do with it? Woohoo! Today's show will be live, and we are so glad that this is a show featuring a one-on-one interview with the mighty Damon T. Hewitt, who is the president of the amazing Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. We are going to be talking about his prescient. You heard me. His looking beyond the present and looking to the future. His insight, his foresight in bringing to the public and alerting our nation about the challenges of AI to voting and racial justice if it's not regulated properly. And folks, you're going to hear a lot today. Remember that a couple of shows ago, we announced that we're going to have a regular show every month or so, just talking about AI, green technologies, talking about very much about technological developments and what do they mean in our quest for racial justice. How can they either help or impede this justice fight? So we are so happy that we will have Damon T. Hewitt as our guest, and I just want you all to know that at the end of the show, for the last 15 minutes, Daryl and I will talk about Supreme Court reform. Yes, we've done so many shows on that subject, and now that the president has made an announcement, we will talk about that. Daryl and I will do so at the end of the show. But let me start off by introducing our amazing guest. Damon T. Hewitt is the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which is one of the nation's foremost organizations fighting for racial justice. He is one of our experts in civil rights litigation and policy. He has more than 20 years of experience, including prior leadership roles in the nonprofit, philanthropic, and public sectors. Prior to joining the Lawyers Committee, he was the inaugural executive director of the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color and was the chief liaison from the philanthropic community to the White House on policy issues impacting young men of color. Hewitt previously worked for more than a decade as an attorney at the NAACP, Legal Defense and Educational Fund. You know, we have their lawyers on all the time, informing and educating all of you about the legal fights that we're engaged in around the country. He joined the Lawyers Committee as this executive vice president in 2019 and was named as president and executive director in 2021. Since then, he has led the organizational victories on a range of critical issues, including affirmative action, race-conscious programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, election protection and voter disinformation, redistricting, fair housing, algorithmic bias and artificial intelligence, and police accountability. Woo-hoo! He has been featured in a lot of news networks, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Guardian, Bloomberg News, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, and CBS. He holds a BA in political science from Louisiana State University and a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Welcome, Damon Hewitt, to good old Igniting Change.
I feel ignited. Thanks so much, Barbara. Great to hear your voice, and Daryl. And, I appreciate all the rundown of the bio, but kudos to our team for all the great work that I get to talk about. Kudos to our allies in this movement. Kudos to you, Barbara, for the foresight to raise this issue for your audience. But also, I'm going to give you credit for hiring me many years ago as your intern here at the Lawyers Committee. So it's just a pleasure to be side by side with you. Makes me feel like I'm all grown up.
Oh, now, wait a minute. You know that you're just leading the way. You're lighting the way. And that's what I wanted to talk about. You know, a lot of people, when they hear this whole question about AI, they are just there, the eyes shade over, they glass over, and they're like, oh, what in the world is that? That's some computers. Isn't that some robotic stuff? I mean, what are they talking about? Why don't you tell our audience, what is artificial intelligence? How does it just affect our daily lives and we don't even realize it?
Sure. Artificial intelligence is, a technical term that it's an umbrella term that describes so much of the technology that we all use every day, or that's being used on us every day. It influences your navigation. When you use your phone, when you try to turn on your phone with facial recognition, if you use an iPhone that way, which a lot of people do, or other types of phones, that's artificial intelligence. It's making determinations about who you are or who it thinks you are. But then there's also the generative AI, the generative artificial intelligence, that tries to predict what you want, what your preferences are. And that's where things can go particularly wrong. It's designed to be a tool to create shortcuts so you can just kind of unplug and let the technology do the work for you. But that's where things can go off the rails.
Wow. And Damon, we have all been, Daryl and I and everyone, we were some kind of upset in January of this year when there was the fake President Biden robocall using what sounded like his voice, telling New Hampshire Democrats not to vote in the primary. Since then, there have been fake ads with AI images of Black people with former President Donald Trump, just generated, not a real event, but made to look like such. And more recently, Twitter's X's CEO Elon Musk yesterday posted an ad that used AI to mimic Kamala Harris's voice over one of her campaign ads after removing any indication that it was a deep fake, manipulated parody video. You have now testified a number of times before Congress on the subject of the impact of artificial intelligence on the fight for racial justice. Tell our audience, how did you get involved with this subject? What led you to look at the unregulated use of artificial intelligence and the way it impedes civil rights progress?
Well, we've had a digital justice initiative here at the Lawyers Committee for probably about 5 or so years now. So there was some early work. The early work started off in the context of what happens online with respect to the spread of hate. Starting in 2016 with the Trump administration, put it that way, there was such a rise of hate. There was open season on all forms of hate and hate-related violence as well. And so we started to see a proliferation online of hateful commentary, of attacks, of targeting, doxing, and what have you. But what our team also started to see was that not only was it hateful, but some of the things that you saw online just simply weren't true. There was intentional mis and disinfo. And your audience knows that in the 2016 election, that a lot of Americans, specifically Black Americans, were targeted by Russian bots, trying to drive a wedge and tell us not to vote, like you were alluding to earlier. And so it was those kinds of things that really sparked the creation of our Digital Justice Initiative. But I'll tell you, there was a particular moment where you talk about elections, in the 2020 election, that really shook up a lot of people. You mentioned the New Hampshire deepfake of President Biden. Well, based on primitive technology in 2020, there was a series of robocalls that went to 85,000 voters. It turns out there were 2 white guys who were trying to target Black voters. And they hired a Black woman as a voice actor. And her script went basically as follows. Did you know that if you vote by mail, the information will be used against you to collect debts by debt collectors, that it will be used by the police to execute outstanding warrants, and that it will be used by the CDC to force mandatory vaccinations? Barbara, she said at the end of the call, don't give your information to the man, essentially by voting by mail. We had to file a lawsuit, which we won, and we were glad that New York Attorney General Letitia James joined us in intervening on behalf of New York voters. We won it because the federal judge found that this was a violation of Section 11B of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits not just government conduct, but private conduct designed to intimidate. These people were also prosecuted in multiple states and also issued a historic fine by the Federal Communications Commission. It's important because it's the first case of its type, and this happened before the New Hampshire deepfake. If you were to take deepfake technology of today with that tactic of just 4 years ago, you can imagine how they could target Black voters today, especially in all the jurisdictions where voting has now been made much more difficult by voter suppression laws. So it's those kinds of stories of real voters. And in fact, we heard about this, Barbara, because a voter who got the robocall called the Election Protection Hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE.
No.
That's how we started learning about it. So we're responding not just to theoretical harms, we're responding to real harms happening to Black people and other Americans because they're telling us it's happened to them, and we're acting on that.
Wow. One thing you said, Damon, and I know Daryl has a question. He's chomping at the bit, but I just want to emphasize to everybody before we get to our next question that hotline number, 866-OUR-VOTE, you've heard me speaking on that since it was created in my office at the Lawyers Committee when we created election protection with the mighty She's now, Judge Anita Earls, leading that effort. And so I just want everyone to take a moment right now, write down however you capture